As Mark probably told you, I'm the Director of Policy Studies at the Center for Immigration Studies, and I cover most of the operational issues of immigration policy, how the agencies do their jobs, what the effective policies are on a practical level, and particularly immigration law enforcement and the administration of benefits and visas. I got into the immigration issue working as a Foreign Service officer in the State Department many years ago, so I've had some practical experience in how the law works and doesn't work. And so I wanted to give you some background on what the current state of our immigration laws and enforcement are at this point. And I'm going to talk a little bit about immigration enforcement and about how this plays out on a practical level in our communities, a little bit about what happens to the people who are subject to immigration enforcement, and if I have time, maybe talk a little bit about how immigration benefits are administered and the importance of fees, which is something that's coming up right now. Immigration enforcement today is most definitely in a state of collapse. Despite the platitudes that you may hear from the Department of Homeland Security, some of their allies, and the media about how this administration has brought us smarter and more effective immigration enforcement and that the border is more secure than ever before, those are all really pretty meaningless unless you look at the data on what actually has been happening with respect to people being removed from the country and deportations. And also keep in mind that the size of the illegal immigrant population has not changed much in the last few years. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is, and I have a lot of this information in the packet back on the table, particularly in the publication on the deportation statistics from 2014. We are at the point now in 2014 where ICE is removing half of the number of people from the interior than the agency was doing in 2009. That's a huge cut in immigration enforcement. Not only they are removing fewer criminals as well, criminal aliens, people who are here, either illegal aliens or also legal permanent residents who've been convicted of a crime are subject to removal in most cases. So even though they say they have a focus on felons, not families, in fact, they're removing fewer criminal aliens than they have in many years also. The total number of deportations, which includes Border Patrol cases, has also fallen to levels below 2007. And even gang arrests, which are supposed to be a priority for ICE, those have dropped 25% in the last couple of years. All of this is happening despite the fact that ICE has more money, more agents, and more technology at its disposal, and in particular a program known as Secure Communities, where ICE gets a notice of every person who's arrested, booked, and fingerprinted into a jail in the United States. Those fingerprints are cross-checked with DHS databases, so they get a notification every time an illegal alien is arrested that they know is an illegal alien. So they have all these resources at their disposal, but they're removing fewer people than ever before. In fact, in 2014, ICE agents identified 585,000 illegal aliens who had been arrested by state and local law enforcement, but they selected only 143,000 of them for removal last year. So there's tens of thousands of them that they are ignoring, essentially. And the reason is not that the deportations have declined is not because there are fewer people trying to come here illegally. Of course, we saw last summer in the surge of families and youths from Central America that there are more people trying to cross the southwest border than ever before. We also know that there are well over 250,000 people who overstay their legal temporary visa every year. That's the latest number from 2012. The reason deportations have declined is because of the Obama administration's policies generally known as prosecutorial discretion or prioritization, or the euphemisms that they've given them. that they have been gradually putting in place since about 2009. Starting in 2011, the administration established limits on who ICE agents were allowed to arrest and process for deportation. And they basically said it would only be people who were convicted of a crime, people who had been deported before, people who'd crossed recently, or people who had skipped out on their immigration hearings. In 2012, they limited that even further by restricting ICE's use of something called a detainer, which allows ICE to get a local law enforcement agency to hold an illegal alien to give them time to pick them up. And then most recently, at the end of November in 2014, with the president's executive actions, now they've essentially said that the only people who will be subject to immigration enforcement are those illegal aliens who have been convicted of a felony or 3 misdemeanors that are considered to be serious, which does not include identity theft and a lot of other state crimes. So they've pretty much given a free pass to virtually every illegal alien who is here who is not convicted of a very serious crime. At the same time, they ended Secure Communities, the very program that would enable them to find out about those illegal aliens who are committing felonies. So they've pretty much, they've cut off both hands now for ICE. And the public safety impact of this is not theoretical. There is definitely an effect. Many of you may be familiar with the case in California of an illegal alien who killed 2 sheriff's deputies outside of Sacramento. That guy, the day before he killed those sheriff's deputies, if he had been arrested and if ICE had been notified, he would not have been considered a priority for enforcement, despite his 10 arrests for a hit and run and other traffic offenses in Utah, despite his prior deportation and so on. He's somebody that ICE is deliberately taking a pass on. I see this play out near where I live in Massachusetts as well, where we have a gang member, a 21-year-old gang member, arrested for 2 armed robberies, total of 7 felony counts of armed robbery that ICE would not issue a detainer on because he had not yet been convicted of those crimes. Under Mass law, he was let out. Then the next gang street brawl that he was involved in, he fired a gun, the bullet went through an apartment window and killed a woman, mother of 3 children. So these policies have very real public safety impacts in our communities. When ICE does not take advantage of the opportunity to remove people who are already here illegally and involved in crimes by waiting for them to do something horrific. Since the executive action was announced, ICE officers have been ordered to begin releasing people that are currently in their custody, currently in deportation proceedings, and letting them out. Already 600 have been released. They are keeping track of exactly who has been released, so this information can be requested by your offices if you're interested in who's being released in your in the areas that your boss represents. And we know what happens when ICE releases illegal aliens instead of keeping them in custody or removing them swiftly. As we saw with the families and youths that were arrested over the summer, 92% of them were released. Already 91% of them have failed to appear at their immigration hearings. So when you hear the administration say that they're putting people into proceedings, that means that usually that they have been released. And what is less well known is that in most cases, these individuals qualify to be issued work permits while they're here. I just received a response from U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services about the number of work permits who have been issued, that have been issued in the last few years, and I found that in each of the last 3 years, this administration has issued about 1 million work permits that is above and beyond people who come in as legal immigrants or who come in on guest worker visas. These are mostly people who are here in the country illegally, who are in deportation proceedings, are being allowed to stay here, and often these proceedings take as long as 5 years. The only way for Congress to address the situation in the short term is to prevent DHS from receiving funds to carry out the president's plan to issue work permits to categories of people that have not been approved by Congress. And it's also going to be necessary to have legislation to try to roll back some of the policy changes that have been. And that needs to focus on ending the catch and release policies that are in place today, and also cutting off the magnet of jobs that brings people to this country in the first place. Because right now the word is out around the world that once you make it to the United States, there will be no enforcement action taken against you, that you'll be allowed to stay. This is not a false rumor. This is in fact the policy that has been implemented. I'll let Rosemary give you some information on what's going on the Hill right now, but happy to take some questions afterwards about any of the details on funding and enforcement and so on. So thanks for coming.